You're listening to the StatsBomb Football Podcast.
One half a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us.
Welcome back to the StatsBomb Football Podcast. I am, as always, your host, Seth Partnow, joined, as most times, by CEO, founder of StatsBomb, Ted Knutson.
Hello.
How you doing today, Ted?
I'm here. I'm good to go.
Good.
Transfer portal's done. So, everything I was doing is off my plate. Not that I was doing anything at all regarding the transfer portal.
I mean, you were definitely looking up, who various guys are. It was interesting to some of the commentary, both in our internal channels and noting, some of the close comps for some of the players that moved. Also joined, as usual, by head of football analysis, Matthew Edwards. As always, Matt, we're going to start with your Baja Blast of the week.
Baja Blast of the week this week is a throwback to like when I've loved these chips for a really long time, and they deserve a shout out of all shout outs. They are the guaca chip, and they're like a tortilla chip that has guacamole flavored seasoning on it. So it's like a Dorito. They're green and they are divine. Like every time I get them, I eat an entire large size bag all in one sitting. It's hard not to. They are so good. And guaca chip. I don't know who makes
better or
them.
worse than nacho cheese Doritos?
Oh, way better. They
Way
might be
better.
the best chip. Yeah, they might be the best chip ever.
So my opinion about nacho cheese Dorito is they are the single greatest design of umami in a snack food. I think that they've gone through like the most scientific element of a design of a chip over time. It would be awesome, and also probably disgusting, to taste like sort of the original run of the Doritos and then like run that through over the course of the last 30, 40 years. I remember taco flavor was one of the two that you used to be able to get.
Yeah. I mean, Doritos has some good flavors, but the guaca chip, it's hard to beat.
Okay.
I have an important question. How are you not running product for Taco Bell, Matt? It seems like your
The
ability.
Venn diagram of
Matt's
Matt's flavors and Taco
Yeah.
Bell's product is very strong.
I want to say that Matt's ability to, as he gets older, to keep his taste palate in the range of a stone 19-year-old is massively impressive. Not that you ever were a stone 19-year-old, which makes it even more impressive.
I think I'm catching up. That's just the problem. Like now it's just catching up to me.
He never lost the taste bud element while he was getting stoned over and over as well.
Yeah.
So he managed to maintain that the entire time.
All right. Moving on. We've been talking a lot over the last month or so about the NFL draft. Understandably, we're in a little bit of a lull in the NFL as we're kind of between drafts and most of the kind of rookie mini camps, when we'll start to hear glowing reports about everyone, because all the draft picks are obviously going to work out. One NFL thing we do want to hit is congratulate a friend of the program, Eric Eager, for signing on with the Carolina Panthers. That certainly bodes well for them in terms of their ability to get sharper in terms of personnel and other stuff. So congrats, Eric. But we wanted to return to, now that it is closed, we want to return to a frequent topic, which is the NCAA transfer portal. As we were kind of getting on, Matt, you had some sort of thoughts about the double window needing to guys moving in and out almost within the same year, and it's kind of showing up for spring ball and then bouncing.
Yeah, it's something that's like, it's sort of happened at the high school level for a while now. These kids that transfer from school to school every year as they're maybe searching for the right opportunity or wanting to get more play time or whatever, frustrations with a coach. They have to have a full family move and all sorts of stuff in the high school level. And it's now happening at the college level, with the change in the regulation of people being able to be immediately eligible as they transfer, even if they're transferring multiple times. And so that's becoming a much bigger deal. And these people, there are a couple of players that have been at like 4 different schools in 5 semesters. And it's going to be really difficult for them to establish any sort of hold in, learning an offense, learning scheme, learning anything But I think it's an interesting byproduct of the added emphasis of like player, empowerment, really giving these players the ability to make their own way. And I think it's something that it's happening quite a bit right now, as it's kind of the Wild West, as everything is opening up. But as this becomes the norm, I'm not sure how much we'll see it. People will always be a little bit disappointed with their role or want to find a better situation, but it is difficult to move that much just logistically, having to find out your new coaches, new everything about schools will probably stop putting up with that of, hey, you've been to a whole bunch of schools, we're going to let you in here and we're just going to figure it out. But interested to see what that looks like in the future.
I think it continues for the superstars, right? Especially so one of the things that Bill Connolly, also a friend of the program, covered in his kind of notes on the portal, there were a couple of quarterbacks that had multiple moves and they were at their next one. If you're a good quarterback searching for the right situation, like that's probably something that is going to continue to happen, right? Much like we talked last week in the draft about premium positions. Like if you are a premium position and you want to go somewhere else, like you can find an offer, especially if you're willing to be flexible about NIL. What's interesting to me is players maximizing NIL versus maximizing kind of fit, opportunity, offensive coordinator type stuff. I think that's going to be an intriguing element too. So say for example, let's bring it back a lot of years to a coach that I think has a style that you appreciated. Let's take it back to the Texas Tech era, where you've got Leach there and you've got quarterbacks there that are undersized and seem to be a little bit weird, but they're putting up gaudy numbers in that system. Maybe you blame the Big 12 defenses a little bit, but I feel like there are going to be players and smart sort of units of advisors, whether that's their parents or their potential agent or whatever, that are going to look and say, all right, this is a place that we want to use as our finishing school. So let's see if we can, maintain good relationships there. And then at the right time, make that leap. Or if you see an OC that you really love, move to someplace new that also has a budget, maybe that's something you do too. I think that's because you can move multiple times, which is a scary, scary prospect for all these schools. And you will hear coaches bitch incessantly about it because that's what they do. I think that it's a totally new world and has to be thought of in a different way as a player.
That makes me think that it probably won't happen because of the instability in the coaching ranks. But what you're describing is almost like, in soccer, we see kind of the multi-club ownership model where some of the smaller the teams in smaller leagues are almost used as like a I don't want to be too pejorative or patronizing, but almost like a JV for okay, well, we like this guy, we don't have room to get him reps here, but he needs game time, so he can go play. He won't get Premiership playing time, but he'll get playing time in Portugal. And just wondering if we could start to see some like well-trodden pathways from like G5 to P5 schools, where the G5 school gets a couple years of a recruit of a caliber that they might not otherwise get, and then knowing that okay, after their sophomore year, they're probably off to Texas or Florida or wherever.
But I think the difficulty in that system is it limits player ability to move, right? And so nothing like that is going to be instituted right now. And it exists over in Europe as a legacy. It's something that when the courts look at it, they're like, ooh, we're not so comfortable about this because, 5-year contract, etc. I think that anything that looks like it restricts player mobility at the moment is just forget about it. Not a possibility. Matt has lots of thoughts about this. So
no, I was just going to say, I think that's sort of to a degree what used to happen with junior colleges. It would regularly be people wouldn't qualify academically, and that was a reason they would go to JUCO. But sometimes there was this player's not developed enough. A big Florida State or other type of school like that would say, hey, we think that you're going to be good, but you should play. You can go to a junior college, and if you're a top school, you're not worried about him going there, turning out really good, and then being like, I'm actually not going to go to Florida State. I'm going to go to, Georgia Southern or whatever. if he's really good, then you're like, oh, great. We recruited you. We love you, but come here now. And I think you could see some of that in the G5, but with the fact that there are more good schools out there, again, it's not going to be the same specific, hey, we have an agreement, so to speak, or we feel really good about that, because like Ted was saying, like the player empowerment, like they're going to be able to say, okay, well, I did well, now I'm going to go to this new school. The thing that I think is really interesting, I don't remember who touched on it earlier, but it was about the decision these people are making in maximizing dollars and revenue, because some players, they're going to look at the transfer portal and say, all right, this is an opportunity for me now to make my money. I could sort of project that I'm not going to be an NFL player. I'm not going to make a lot of money there, but I do have the opportunity to make a decent chunk of money in college. I need to maximize my earning right now. And I think we've seen that with some of these, especially quarterbacks who are coming back 6th, 7th year. Let's say a good example is like Cam Rising at the University of Utah. He didn't play last year at all because of an injury, but he was making $750,000, I think, maybe $1 million based on what reports you see. And he's not going to be an NFL quarterback. And if he can do that, add a COVID year to his eligibility, find a medical red shirt, all these things, he can maximize quite a bit of money at the college level. And I think that the transfer portal, these players are seeing that now, like, hey, I can go and get mine right now, for the players like Caleb Williams, or somebody who's like, okay, well, I'm actually going to be able to make even more than this in the NFL with my NFL contracts. What's the right move? And he transferred, but it wasn't because he was unhappy. He transferred with his coach because it was like, well, Lincoln Riley is the moneymaker,
right.
And so follow him, and I will then be making that money at the next level.
Yeah, look at how many first-round draft pick quarterbacks Lincoln Riley has produced over the last decade, and it's a number that says I should go play for Lincoln Riley. That's definitely true. So I think one of the things that I find both surprising and also disappointing at the same time is the numbers that we're hearing on the rumor mill of like the size of certain schools' NIL budgets, or not schools, but committee. What do they call it? The NIL committee. Their NIL
collective. The collective.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry. And in a lot of cases, you're looking at small amount is 5 million, and the acceptable competitive amount for reasonable schools in the bigger conferences is like 8 to 10 a year, right? Which you think of that like, wow, that's a lot of money for high school kids, coming out and then doing that, and a big number is 750. But the flip side of that is it's a tiny drop in the bucket versus coach compensation, especially when they get fired. Like, look at how much they had to pay Jimbo just to leave, and so like you're looking at it, you're like, all right, where's the balance inside of this? How quickly is that going to adjust? And I think that it'll be much faster. One of the things we keep hearing is that someone needs to get ahead of this and find a structure that makes sense and limits the damage. Because in soccer, you see there are teams that have between 70 and 125% of turnover on wages, right? Like the ones that are trying to get up into the Premier League, or even the big clubs, you're looking at 60-70% of their entire budget goes into player wages alone. The worry is that college is going to move into that space, but it's pretty early on in it. But the other side that Matt's saying, which I think is actually, it's a difficult thing for you to optimize for, because so many of these kids don't have that mindset of, let me make my money in college. Like, you're competitive to get to the NFL. You have to be that type of player to compete every single day, to go out there and do all the reps in order to get to the highest level. And that's more of a management thing behind the scenes that is tricky too. So one question that I had that we Seth and I spent a bit of time with Miami under an earlier coaching regime. It feels like the eternally disappointing Miami Hurricanes program that never quite gets back to the heights that we saw in the Bad Boys era. Bill Connolly was flagging them up as having a really interesting portal era and also a very good recruiting period. Like, is it finally time to say that, between the portal restock and are they going to be competitive? Are they going to be good? The ACC's down. Is it going to happen?
This is Ted just baiting people to listen to our podcast right now. Are they back? I mean,
I'm just asking questions. I just want to know.
They've always had talent. I mean, when you guys were there, I was at the University of Virginia, and Miami was always the most talented team that we played every year. You know, sometimes we played Clemson one year and they were really talented, but Miami always had the talent. There are a few teams like this. It's like Texas, LSU, Alabama, or not Alabama. They have backed it up a little bit. Miami, where you look at their roster and they're just really good. I mean, LSU last year had Heisman Trophy quarterback, 2 first-round receivers, and was 8-4 regular season. I mean, these rosters are so talented, and it does look like Miami, you know, they had a few holes with their roster, and they went through. They got Cam Ward in the transfer portal. You know, they have filled some of these holes. At some point, there's got to be something else that's going on. But I do think that Miami, it appears, was spending pretty good in the transfer portal. You know, they seem to at least be on target with, this is what the transfer portal is for as a team building exercise, right?
I think you're probably right. Yeah. Like, let's fill in a couple of holes, raise the floor. The high school kids are usually your ceiling unless you grab a premium position or two. So that's got a point. And then I want to come back to your LSU point and another comparable team.
No, I've got a question sort of based on, you know, that idea is positionally, what are the holes you can fill in the transfer portal? Sort of by observation, when we were down at Miami, it seemed like there was a lot of talent, but it seemed like the places where it wasn't quite the elite level was sort of the harder positions to measure, kind of the interior defensive line and the offensive line, where you know they had one or two kind of the superior athlete of you know bodies of that size, but it wasn't sort of all the way filled out. And like the difference between sort of a talented team that doesn't quite achieve and the ones that just runs everyone over, like, you know, a lot of the Alabama teams, for example, is that. So is that something you can do in the portal, or are those players so premium that's like, we're getting these 4 or 5 star, you know, defensive linemen, offensive tackles, whatever in high school recruiting, and we're doing everything we can to hang on to them, but that's the only way we're getting those players?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on the offensive line specifically. That I think that's a really tricky position, and you're not really able to get that many high quality guys in the transfer portal. You see a lot of teams that are reaching for players. I remember, you know, somebody even as I can't remember the kid's name out of Rhode Island that came out a few years, but it was an FCS player that everybody was after. And I think that is multiple things. One, there are just not that many people that have that body size. Two, they play a position that has not been highlighted, pampered, anything their whole life. They're just there. And so when they get to college, they're just there. They're not getting huge NIL money unless it's, you know, like the top guy at O-line. And they're just, yeah, they're for them, it's like, why would I transfer? It's just, I'm at my team. And also there's so many, there are 5 at a time. And to be able to find 8 or 9 that you need to realistically play, like it's tricky. So I think
let me also add, institutional knowledge at that position is actually really important, right? And having those guys around for 2 years has a big difference in whether or not you're more likely to succeed, like with the same coaching group, with the same scheme. You know, defensive linemen, you can mostly toss them in and they're going to be freaks no matter where they're at. But the offensive line, like, there's not just a player knowledge thing. It's harder for them to transfer. They have a lot of learning that they have to do in that initial bit, and that should be a little bit scary to them. And then there's also the unit dynamics that I think that we haven't talked about much here, but a lot of people who have coached O-line or played O-line feel like, you know, unit dynamics is a pretty big deal. Like, learning what the guy next to you on either side is likely to do in any particular situation is helpful to the whole unit to be able to perform better.
The fact that these players are hard to find and they have not traditionally been pampered, as you put it, Matt. That just seems like a natural sort of, the phrase to moneyball it is obviously like so cliche, but if you can identify the players, which I guess is part of the issue, that seems like, okay, do we want to spend like $1 million on a guy we know is a pretty good but not elite quarterback, or do we want to spend that money on 3 4-star-ish offensive linemen? I don't
if
know
we can create a great offensive line every year, like how much does that improve our chances of winning? It's pretty damn good, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
how
a big
how
deal.
much of that 10 million, if you could do it, would it be worth spending on interior defensive line and offensive line?
That's a job interview question for Matt for his next team spot. Like this
is genuine curiosity, because part of what we're kind of talking around is, because it's so new, because of all the COVID years, is we haven't really reached any sort of stable equilibrium with kind of how this works in terms of, slotting guys in and who is in and who is out. And so this is, I think, you mentioned the teams that figured out first will have an advantage. This seems like the spot.
Yeah, it really does. You look at the NFL and their salaries, because they've had this salary cap for a really long time, and the salaries are increasing every year by the TV money that's coming in and everything, but the percentages that positions are being played remains about the same. You're seeing some increases for quarterbacks, you're seeing some increases in receivers, but there are trends that people follow with that, because there's none of that at the college level and there's no salary cap at this point. There's some sort of revenue share discussion going on and a whole bunch of suggestions about what they can do for players and coaches and to try and stabilize it. But because it's all brand new, I think that's a huge area where people can look at a roster and say, all right, this is the amount that we have. We have $15 million and this is where we want to spend it. And if you think about it like an NFL team and say, okay, most people spend 20% on their quarterback for a non-rookie quarterback. All right, what does that look like for us? Okay, now teams spend this amount at O-line, this amount at receiver. You can then start to say, okay, if we want to be a smart team, this is kind of how we should start spending our money. And instead of just, hey, we've got this money, let's spend it. So you look at a team like LSU, they needed defensive linemen in this spring portal window. And there were some decent players. Like there were a couple of kids that committed to Oregon. I think one committed to Colorado that was pretty good. But
Oklahoma got a D lineman.
Oklahoma got that kid. And so for LSU, they were too much for what we have. That didn't fit into our nice little budget that we've created. Do they not have the money because they spent it unwisely at other positions, or what does that look like internally for them? But I think that, if you're going to want to build a consistent team, which quite frankly, because of the volatility for coaches, I don't know that that's high on their list. But if you want to say, hey, I feel great, I'm at Alabama, I'm not leaving this job for any other job, and I don't want to get fired in 2 years, you're going to want to have some stability there. You're going to want to be able to actually build a model for how much money you're wanting to spend at each position. And that, money may increase year over year based on collective fundraising and whatever. But just the general idea of, okay, we now have a budget instead of just unlimited, hey, we have some money, let's spend it on somebody. What does that look like?
This is utter clarity around the idea that you actually need a GM to manage college now. Like, because it aligns very cleanly with a lot of the exact same concepts in the NFL, except it's more dynamic, which means that, like, if you don't have somebody and a staff overseeing this, like, you have a chance to just get wiped out year after year because you're not ahead of that curve. You're not even understanding what the curve looks like. So the NIL budget is a big deal. Working with the collective is a big deal, but resource management and where you're weak and being aware of all the options on a portal by portal window basis is enormous. Like, you've got to be ahead of it.
I have a related question, and we're talking a lot about volatility and year to year. And is this a situation where almost the practice of scholarships being single year renewable is actually turning around and biting schools a little bit? Because to synthesize sort of what your very good points about the need for, unit cohesion and development, especially in like line positions. If it's like, okay, we're gonna use some of our NIL money on this guy. What if he leaves in a year? Then we've just wasted that money. Do we start to see multi-year deals? And then that is like the risk factors there is, okay, what if he turns out to not be good? What if the coach leaves? What if he gets hurt?
So you're already seeing it, and you're seeing it in retention bonuses. So effectively, like, let's say it's a 1 million deal. Like year one is 333 and year two is 666. Like if you complete the season. And so that is the, that is the potential way to restructure that. But again, you've got to be clever enough to do it. Like you're not looking at it as a 1 year project. Like, hey, we need this offensive lineman for 2 years. Year one's still going to suck if he bounces in the first window though. So yeah, it's so complicated and over the top, and there's so much player management that has to go on both at the coaching level and at the organization level that it's just a whole new wave of challenges, almost regardless of what your budget looks like.
There's parallels to college basketball where I think we've kind of started to see there definitely some teams, even some traditionally kind of power teams, are having success not really recruiting the very top end. Because I mean, you've seen like Kentucky under John Calipari, great talent every year, but it's a whole new team every year. And it comes the end of the year, they find it, they get themselves in a tough situation. They don't really have the institutional knowledge and the togetherness, and they get bounced early in the NCAA tournament. And then he goes to coach Arkansas. But teams are okay. Well, we're going to go high 3-star, 4-star guys who are going to stay 3-4 years and build that way versus necessarily always going at the super top end where now the one and done phenomenon obviously doesn't exist in college football, but the one and I'm gonna get paid is maybe at that level. So I'm wondering if there are teams that decide, we're gonna maybe not have the toppest end talent, but we're gonna be consistent and predictable and stable.
Out of a 90-player roster, how much can you isolate personality and the ability to laugh at yourself while also looking at all the talent? And that's so hard. But that's kind of what you're asking, right? Like how do you take this into the space where we need smart football kids, which doesn't necessarily need smart grades kids. Some universities need both, plenty don't. But how do we find kids that have like the character and the talent and the grit to work through it? While supporting them and making them feel like they're special. But maybe also what we just talked about, offensive linemen don't get made to feel that special that often. So maybe you in order to differentiate yourself as a recruiting pitch, you're like, look, we've got this cool offensive line, program that we're going to put you into. I don't know. I think it's for me, as somebody who's entrepreneurial and likes to throw a lot of ideas off the wall, like this is a fun space. I could see people being terrified by it.
Well, I think that when you're talking about that, Seth, I had the thought of like almost the mid to later round NFL draft picks where it's no longer hey, this guy is good at everything. It's we have a very specific idea of his one good talent, and this is how we're going to utilize it. And that may be, some of these smaller, whether it's smaller P5 teams or whatever. Like I remember TCU under Gary Patterson for a while, they recruited running backs and then would make them change position because at the time, this was 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, running backs were the best kid on every high school team, right? You just put your best kid at running back and you hand him the ball. So he's like, well, that's the best athlete, even if he doesn't play linebacker or defensive end. Like one of the perfect
he does now.
Yeah, he does now. He'll put on a little bit of weight. Like Jerry Hughes was a high school running back, best athlete on the team. He's like, well, we could make him be an elite edge rusher, and turned out to be the case. And they had 4 or 5 kids like that who were top tier college players that were learning new positions, and they had played running back. I think the position to do that with now is quarterbacks, because now it's put your best athlete at quarterback, run him some, have him throw a little bit, and just you want the ball in his hand. So I think you could do it that way as well of, hey, we really want great receivers or tight ends, but these top receivers are requiring a whole ton of NIL money. We have this quarterback who's, maybe a lesser quarterback, but is a great athlete, is a great football player. He can do whatever. And we're going to recruit him, and he'll learn a new position. He'll play some, and that's going to be a completely different scenario than like a top tier 4-star receiver kid who, hey, maybe he'll play a little bit as his first year and then move on. And, you don't know how that's going to look, but
this is all very much the dynamics of what is possible and which areas you can execute from a strategic point. Like, this is pure money ball in an unknown space. I find it exciting. I wanted to go back to your running back into linebacker conversation. So I don't know, 6 years ago, James York and I were speaking at a national team conference around talent ID. The national team was sort of championing their ability to find players early on in the national team sort of pipeline that then graduated into the senior national team. And they were really good at about, I think, maybe 6 out of 8 positions. And James and I looked at it and they're like, oh, okay, so they're not doing very well at defensive midfielder and center back. And they were frustrated about their inability to find the future stars in that area when they were young. And I said, I would ask every one of the current national team players who play those positions what they played when they were age 14 and 16, because I will almost guarantee you that none of them played defensive midfielder or center back. What happens is the best players that are tall gradually get pushed back or they stay forward, right? But they don't end up out in the wings. You don't see many 6'2" wingers these days, or fullbacks in particular, because like that's a tough position to be that big and do that much running. And so, yeah, what actually happens is, because of the dynamics of the selection coaching process, you will never almost see those players unless they're like particular players that stand out so much in a skill set, or they love that position when they're really young and they could have played anywhere, but they just happen to be that player. The other thing that I found was that so many times we get locked into ideas around recruitment, and this guy can only play this position, especially at the professional space. But one of the questions that somebody very smart that we know owns a team would ask is like, hey, if Messi were available and we could only fit him in as a defensive midfielder, would you get Messi as a defensive midfielder? And they're like, yeah, maybe we should be a little bit looser on the idea of, these awesome players that have a particular skill set, like, could they be more flexible? And there are some positions you can do that with in soccer, and some you absolutely cannot. And I think what Matt's saying is like, that's probably true as well. Like, you have to have a minimum set of skills in order to be able to do X, Y, Z. Like, you can't put a guy at 5 that's 6'6" and expect him to score very often these days, right? He might be able to be the chuck wagon or something like that, and be able to rebound and clean up on the boards, but you're not going to expect him to, go low post and put up a lot of numbers there.
I got to know, were you scouting my high school soccer career? Because that's exactly what happened to me. As I got taller, I got moved back, played forward up through Little League, junior high a little bit, then high school, they're like, oh, you play defensive center mid and stopper and center back. I was like, all right, well, cool.
You're tall, but you don't actually have good touch. So go back there. And
no, that's exactly what happened. Yeah. I got taller, my touch got worse.
Yeah.
Feet of stone is how we refer to those guys.
I mean, I was, it's top of mind because he just retired, but a little bit of what you're talking about is Jason Kelsey. He was he was like a tight end, and then he gets to college, and he talked about this in his retirement press conferences. Like, one of his I think it was his strength and conditioning coach was like, you could be a great center, and he's like, oh, no, I don't gonna have the ball. And then that was just a observation of of projecting someone into a different thing with maybe a different training regimen and stuff like that. And that strikes me as something that's really hard. Having the people around who have that imagination, and then the coaching willingness to live with growing pains in a very short-term business seems like
the Kelsey brothers obviously clearly are elite functional athletes. And so any number of play, but they're also really bright. And I think that level of adaptability is sort of inherent in the kids that are bright and able to do that. This is the story of Guardiola on Bayern Munich's team when he was coaching there. And there were a couple of players that were elite players, but you could give them like 2 instructions a game. And then someone like Philip Lahm or Joshua Kimmich, you could give them an entire book of instructions and they would ask you for more. And knowing your player dynamics is a big deal too. Matt, who is very, very biased about this, would tell you that tight end is one of the hardest positions, and it takes the smartest players and the best looking players in order to play that position.
If it's good enough for Taylor Swift, you got to think
I knew it.
Good.
I set it up.
You
so
really
well,
did.
Spike it right back down.
No, but I think the point there is really interesting as well. And one of the things that is going to be tricky about the transfer portal always is the speed at which it happens, this recruiting process. You look at the change from college to the NFL, these players that go to the NFL are over analyzed and over evaluated for months, and they get interviews and they go back and talk to their kindergarten teachers and try and find any sort of weird thing they can. They analyze what's in a player's backpack and all sorts of crazy stuff. And a transfer portal, you're in the portal, 2 days later, you're at a new team.
Absolutely.
And that kind of background information can really help teams. And so I don't know that there is a good solution, but if you, as
I think there is. Do your work early. I mean, I think this is like,
that's very true.
We haven't. I mean, we sort of, one thing we have not really mentioned at all on this pod, which is weird for us, is data, and it seems like that's almost the key. Is like, all right, we know we have to move quick. To move quick, we have to be prepared. And how do we be prepared? Well, we can't. It's not really possible to watch every snap of every tight end who might possibly go into the portal, and it's certainly not, it's not, especially if you think you might be able to have some influence. Not that anyone would tamper with another team's players. That never happens, certainly. But you have to, if you don't have a list and probably a reasonably rank ordered list in the NIL era of value list, like what's the to get technical about what's the reserve price on we go above this number, nope, move on to the next line. I don't know how you can systematically actually do this.
Yeah, you look at Nick Saban in the draft and everyone thought he was talking about tampering, but they had built a list of, hey, these are our top cornerbacks that are playing college football right now. Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo was number 1 on that list. And Nick Saban said, like, they were going to hit him hard had he entered the portal. They knew, they had identified him as, this is a great player. I think it's easier for those top teams to be like, okay, well, these are the good guys. But especially if you're one of those teams that needs to be a little bit more data forward, and it's going to be a little bit trickier for a mid-level P5 team, you're not going to get those top players. And so, yeah, you're gonna have to really dig in to those middle-level players and say, all right, well, what is the data telling us? Because they're going to be, similar, especially fall window. Everybody's being recruited by everybody. It's crazy. But if you can be on a player quick and say, hey, we really want you. We've identified these areas, blah, blah, blah. We want you to come visit. If you can be one of the first guys, because then that increases your chances quite a bit to be faster, to be in that position to sign those players who are not the top, but are going to be great fits for you, or great fits for, the next jump that they need to take.
That leads me to a question, and I'll ask Ted this question, because I think, there's obviously I'll ask you specifically about soccer. Is better bet lower level player who's excelled moving up, or a player who has disappointed / failed at a higher level moving down?
Almost impossible to tell without more context. I wanted to come to the point of what Matt was talking about, though, around the compression between the mid-majors and the elite teams in college basketball, and thinking that basically over the next 10 years, as we're still early in this NIL era, The teams that are able to better take advantage of all the dynamism in the rules and stuff like that, whether that's data, whether that's optimizing NIL, I mean, all of it's the same job, really. How do we get better information and make better decisions that don't allow us to make mistakes while, having better coaches and all of that? Like, those are the teams that will excel. And you could actually see a couple of teams that are sort of in the pack and unexciting regularly overperform. And you're like, wow, this is a team that, used to be 6-6, and now they're 8-4, 9-3 on a regular basis, and they even contended for a conference championship. That's wild. That shouldn't even be happening. It doesn't cost you that much money. Like, that's like to be smart in this area, you're looking at $500,000 maybe. Like, it's not even that big a deal. On the soccer question, like, it really does have massive amounts of context. So did we have earlier information that said that they were a good player in younger years? Were they Kenny Pickett and only had one good season ever? Have they never had a good season? But they were an elite kid coming out of, the 18s, but they've never excelled in the professional space. And then, like, what does their temperament look like? One of the things we found in soccer that really surprised me as a data nerd who had assumptions was, like, player output is a portion of what you care about, but it's like 70%. And player mentality is a really big deal, especially for kids for soccer players who have been coached, their entire lives, and they've been part of this academy system, and it's not really part of the real world. So, like, European is different. What happens is, like, some of those kids hate it. Like, they end up hating the game by the time that they turn 22. And so you're like, all right, is this a kid that still loves going to work every day? Or is he a kid that, like, the moment he signs a big contract, he's going to just cash everything in? We kind of have seen that over time with, like, the Brazilian players who come from, extreme poverty and then grow into being these elite superstars. And they seem to have a lesser lifespan of their careers because, at some point the partying gets in and it's part of the lifestyle, and all their friends back home are partiers and stuff like that. Versus
they don't have Matt's metabolism.
Right, exactly. Matt's metabolism and the Doritos and Mountain Dew diet have different impacts on certain people. So what we found was basically players that wash out because they were attitude problems or probably going to be attitude problems. They go from place to place and are like that. And they don't seem to have long-term productivity stretches as they get into sort of their prime at any one place. They're almost vagabonds in their career. I think that college can be that way, but getting that information around those players is really hard to do. So you need to have the best info that you can. And then you get Matt's thing where they go back into kindergarten and want to know about, what's in your bag. And then you find Keon Coleman, who just is like the most fun person to listen to when he gets on the mic in any conference.
I think the interesting thing you were talking about there, though, is about traits. And you look at players, if you have identified them early, you know what their traits are, what you think is going to translate. So if you look at their film, and let's say it's the example you were using, both Seth and Ted, is a player that went to a big school and maybe did not perform as well. Well, did their traits transfer? And is that something that you saw at the next level? Then, okay, we had identified these traits that we liked and we saw those. We think that would still fit here. And it wasn't a fit there. And similar, okay, well, what is making this player so dominant at a lower level? Are they just a little bit physically better? Or is it a specific trait that we're looking for that can, that we like, I have identified is really good for this position? And I think that's a key.
Don't sign a Jadon Sancho and then expect him to just tap the ball around the final third. You sign him to be able to propel the ball forward throughout the midfield and into the final third, and then be able to help everybody else score. And when he decides that he's going to have the ball and wants to light people on fire in a Champions League semifinal, he can apparently do that over and over again, even against the best teams. Versus if you try and put, a set of constraints on him that don't allow him to. I'm doing this because Seth is a Manchester United
I want to
fan.
screenshot Seth right now and put it out. Just the sadness, the despair.
And he's an English kid too, which was like the weirdest bit. Like, England turns out awesome players out of their academy system these days. Germans decided that, wow, we're going to bring over as many as possible. Jude Bellingham also is another one. And we're going to get them over here early, going to get them into a free-flowing game, much of the NBA these days. And then we're going to see how they perform. And then you put them back into a system where the coach wants to, really constrain that stuff and doesn't understand why they were great somewhere else. And you just end up lighting 80 million on fire on a regular basis.
So to bring it back to the conversation, the reason I was asking that is we're very pro data, and it seems to me that Matt sort of identified a way that data can help with sort of, well, how could this work for a player moving down? But it would seem like that would be a potential hiccup, is that you're probably going to be more able to identify the players who should move up than the ones who can still perform moving down, or is he a guy who just for whatever reason can't transfer the potential to production, almost regardless of the level you put him at.
We'd say don't overpay for that, right? Because there's a risk.
Yeah.
So like always be careful about the overpay. Maybe you can give them a new lease on life. You talk to them about why they want to move if you have the time. But the transfer portal's Wild West. So you don't.
I mean, there's no shortage of we can fix him. And this is you talked about the need for a GM position. GMs are just as bad as that as coaches.
Yeah.
Like our coaches are special, so they can get the most out of him. So yeah, and that's a dangerous mindset to be in. Anyway, I think that's a good a spot as any to stop for this week. I think coming up we will start to hear some stuff about players in mini camps, and we can maybe see what their collegiate production looked like, to see if that matches the notes we're getting out of these mini camps. Ted, you got anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
Mini camps are a time for media to get on board and be endless founts of positivity, which is the opposite of what they do in the regular season. But I'm not sure how much we should rely on that. No, I think it's been really fun and really interesting to look at both the draft and the portal again through kind of the full lens of our data, and then try and figure out like what does the future of college look like, and what is sort of the present of the pros look like. I think that we're seeing dynamic change, and it's going to open up into a lot of roles in the college space that don't exist right now. We've been predictors of this a few different times in our history. Seth, when you started writing, like how many of your friends were people who wrote versus how many of them are now employed by the NBA everywhere else? It's a massive change.
It's a dozen people that I wrote with or edited, back in 2013, 2014 are roles with teams.
Didn't exist then, though.
Yeah.
They were not roles that existed outside of a baseball context and maybe two NBA teams.
Yeah. Shout out to Nick Restifo of the Knicks for, obviously giving Tibbs the advice that, no, just play the guy 48 minutes. It'll be fine. I'm sure that Nick's the one doing that. Matt, do you have anything to add before we get out of here?
No, I feel like it was a fun discussion, and as always, appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for listening. We will be back next week with more StatsBomb Football. Take care, everyone.